My name is Olivia Harper, and at 30 years old, my family treated me like the invisible child for 30 years. You are a failure. I revealed my multi-million-dollar portfolio. The room froze. If you have ever felt betrayed by the people who should have been your biggest supporters, let me know where you are watching from. I was finally confronting the reality of my family, the favoritism, the dismissals, and the quiet eraser of my accomplishments. My younger sister Sophie had always been the golden child, the one praised, supported, and adored. I had grown up invisible, overshadowed, and quietly grinding on my own. But that day, I realized invisibility had a price: freedom. I returned to my apartment and sat staring at the walls. The city lights flickering outside my window. The memories were sharp and jagged, cutting deeper than I expected. Every slight, every shrug, every forgotten birthday, and every unheard accomplishment, all of it had added up. I'd been waiting for approval that would never come, and now I had to decide. Would I continue waiting, or would I take control of my story? The answer came quietly. I began revisiting the projects I had neglected, my real estate investments, my tenant communications, my spreadsheets of cash flow, all meticulously maintained, but temporarily abandoned, suddenly demanded attention. Each property wasn't just a number. It was a monument to the years of struggle, to the nights I worked while Sophie traveled the world, and to the sacrifices I'd made without recognition. But then an unexpected distraction arrived. A private message on Instagram. It was Emmer, my cousin, the one who had inadvertently set off the reunion chaos by mentioning my podcast appearance. She was the only family member who hadn't completely swallowed the narrative that I was just the quiet, unremarkable one. Olivia, the message read, "Are you okay? People are talking." Sophie's spinning her version of the story. "They don't even know half of it." I exhaled slowly, fingers hovering over the keyboard. Part of me wanted to ignore her. Part of me craved connection. Finally, I typed back, "I'm fine, but it's time someone tells the truth." Over the next few days, Emma and I met at a small cafe near my apartment. She leaned in across the table, voice low and conspiratorial. "Your parents, they're in full damage control mode," she said. "Apparently, Sophie's been telling everyone you were just lucky, that you didn't earn any of your properties. She's even hinting that the podcast was staged." A familiar knot of anger twisted in my stomach. I had spent years building, learning, and investing. And here was Sophie attempting to erase it all with whispers and half-truths. "Then we need to be ready," I said. "If they try to rewrite the story, I'll make sure the truth is visible publicly if I have to." Emma nodded. "That's smart. Also, the 40th anniversary. You're going to get the invite soon. Sophie's planning it. Trust me, it's all optics. She wants to be the star as usual." The anniversary invitation arrived in the mail a few days later. I tore open the navy blue envelope with its gold cursive lettering. The words were formal, polite, almost polished. "Please join us in celebrating the 40th wedding anniversary of Michael and Diane Harper," it read. I stared at it, a small smile tugging at my lips. For once, I was not the invisible daughter. And I had a plan for the next 2 weeks. I meticulously prepared. I gathered receipts, photographs, tenant testimonials, property timelines, everything that demonstrated without boasting the life I had built from scratch. Each duplex, each triplex, each modest commercial building was a testament to perseverance, resilience, and silent determination. I wasn't preparing to gloat. I was preparing to reclaim my story. The day of the anniversary, clouds hung low in the sky, as if the universe itself were hesitant about the drama to come. I arrived fashionably late, a deliberate choice. Inside, the rented ballroom was dressed in white linens and chandeliers that tried and failed to disguise the low-budget wine and dollar store centerpieces. Sophie was the first to notice me. Our eyes met, and I saw the tension immediately. Her jaw clenched, her hands tied at her sides. Emma waved discreetly from across the room. I walked toward her, smiling faintly. aware of the quiet stir I was causing, fashionably late, I said as I took the seat she reserved. Sophie's performance began with a slideshow highlighting her childhood trophies, vacations, and achievements. My presence was barely acknowledged. A few baby pictures, a single caption noting Olivia pursuing tech projects. It was barely a nod to the years of late nights coding, fixing neighbors' computers, and building a business from the ground up. As Sophie's speech concluded, the room erupted in polite applause. She stood, basking in the glow of her perceived victory. I waited. I allowed the quiet to settle once more before standing. "Hey everyone," I began, adjusting the microphone with calm precision. My voice was steady, deliberate. "I promise I won't take long." The crowd shifted, curious. Sophie's eyes narrowed. I continued, deliberately pausing to let the anticipation build. "I just want to say thank you to Mom and Dad for inviting me. 40 years is a remarkable achievement, and I respect that." I gestured to the slideshow behind me. It's amazing to see so many memories. But I want to clarify a few things about my own journey. I introduced myself properly. Olivia Harper, 30 years old. I spoke of my path. No college assistance, no graduation trips, no parental support in my investments. I described the work, the nights coding websites, repairing laptops, and saving every penny for my first duplex at age 26. I outlined my growth, my properties, and quietly my success. When I tapped my phone, the screen behind me illuminated with a curated portfolio, photos of my properties, cash flow charts, market growth graphs, and tenant testimonials. A small note on the final slide read, "Net worth $5 million. Gasps rippled through the room. Sophie's mouth opened, then closed. Her carefully maintained facade cracked. "Sometimes," I said, stepping back from the microphone, "the black sheep is just the one who got tired of pretending." I didn't wait for applause. I didn't need validation. I returned to my seat, calm, composed, and unapologetic. Sophie, however, was exposed. Her entitlement, her assumptions, and her false narrative crumbled in the quiet aftermath around us. Whispers began, questions, disbelief, admiration, small but undeniable. The power had shifted, and for the first time I was fully visible. The room was thick with tension after my reveal. Conversations murmured like a low tide, as darting between Sophie and me. I felt no triumph, only a quiet satisfaction, a recognition of my own worth. Sophie, meanwhile, was fumbling, unable to regain control. Her practiced smile had hardened into a rigid mask, and I could see the panic flicker in her eyes. My parents, Michael and Diane Harper, were the hardest to read. Mom's hand trembled slightly as she lifted her champagne glass, and Dad's eyes flickered with disbelief. I wasn't expecting them to cheer. I only wanted acknowledgement that invisibility was not weakness. "You built all this," Mom finally whispered, more to herself than anyone else. "Yes, Mom," I said softly, meeting her gaze. "Every step, every late night, every risk was mine. And yes, I succeeded without anyone telling me I could." Dad looked down at his glass, silent. His silence was familiar, but today it didn't wound me. I had already claimed my own validation. Sophie's friends and extended family began whispering among themselves, some looking guilty, some impressed. I caught snippets. I had no idea. She did all that alone. Sophie, she really hid this. I felt a hand on my shoulder. Emma leaned in, smiling. "You just rewrote history," she murmured. I nodded calm. "Not history, my story." The rest of the evening was surreal. Sophie attempted small talk, forced compliments, but they rang hollow. Her charm, once effortless, was fractured. She asked about a property I had purchased last year, trying to feign interest. I answered politely, but without warmth. I realized I didn't owe her approval or admiration. She had spent a lifetime overshadowing me. I didn't need to repay the favor with patience. By the end of the night, the whispers had turned into conversations. Some family members approached me privately, asking questions about my business, my life, and my investments. For the first time, I felt the attention I had always craved, but not the validation I had once sought from my parents or Sophie. This attention was earned, not given. Walking back to my apartment that night, the air cool against my skin, I felt lighter than I had in years, for decades. I had carried invisibility like a weight, an unspoken punishment for being overlooked. Tonight, I had shed it piece by piece, but life rarely allows a single victory to exist without consequence. The next morning, Sophie sent a text that made my pulse quicken, not with fear, but with wary anticipation. "We need to talk now," I read it twice, melon faintly, and typed back, "Fine, but only truth is allowed." Later that afternoon, Sophie arrived at my apartment, a forced calmness masking the tension behind her eyes. She crossed the threshold cautiously, avoiding direct eye contact. I gestured to the living room couch, and she sat, fidgeting. I didn't realize she began. Her voice was small, uncertain. I didn't know it was this much. I let her fumble for words, observing her closely. Her pride, once unshakable, now wavered. "Olivia," she finally said, "I feel embarrassed. You did all this, and I just assumed things." I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I let the silence stretch, forcing her to sit with the weight of her admission. Finally, I said, "Sophie, you don't get a trophy for apologizing, but you do get a choice. You can continue pretending I'm invisible, or you can acknowledge reality. The truth doesn't change based on who's comfortable hearing it." Her eyes filled with tears, not just shame, but the first glimpse of respect. She nodded slowly. "I want to do better. I really do." I leaned back, letting her sincerity sink in. "Then start small. Listen more than you speak, and stop trying to control the narrative. It's not yours to rewrite." She exhaled a long, shaky breath. "Okay, I'll try." The moment felt like a fragile truce, an acknowledgement that relationships could change if honesty was allowed to exist without fear. And in that fragile truth, I found a sense of peace. The days that followed were different. My parents, still awkward, began to ask questions, not demanding, not judging, but curious. They were tentative, as if learning who I really was for the first time. I didn't push them, didn't need their validation. Instead, I embraced the freedom that came with self-recognition. At work, my reputation grew quietly but steadily. Tenants and colleagues alike began to notice my diligence, my insights, and my fairness. My sister's influence waned. People saw her perfectionism for what it was, performative, not genuine. The world finally began to align more closely with reality. And at night, when I sat by my window, watching the city pulse below, I felt an unfamiliar warmth, a sense of belonging to my own life, my own choices, and my own achievements. I wasn't invisible anymore. Not to anyone. The path ahead wasn't perfect. Family dynamics never are. Sophie still struggled with jealousy. My parents still had their own blind spots. But the battle for recognition, for respect, for truth, it was over. I had won it on my own terms. And in that victory, I discovered something I hadn't realized. I was seeking freedom. Freedom from invisibility. Freedom from expectation. And freedom to define myself, not as the overlooked daughter, not as the quiet sibling, but as Olivia Harper, entrepreneur, achiever, and unapologetically visible. Weeks passed, and the atmosphere in the Harper household shifted subtly, but unmistakably. My parents, Mikkel and Diane, had begun to treat me differently, not with overt praise, but with a tentative curiosity that replaced years of invisible neglect. Mom started asking about my investments, genuinely interested in my strategies rather than just the numbers. Dad, who had always been quiet in my presence, now asked for my opinions on matters big and small. Their questions were clumsy at times, tinged with guilt, but they were a start. For the first time, Our conversations felt two-sided rather than interrogations or lectures. Sophie, too, made small gestures. She invited me to dinner without her friends, without an audience, just the two of us. We talked quietly, honestly, about the past, the subtle ways she had overshadowed me and the damage it caused. She admitted that she had been insecure, fearful of losing attention, and afraid I might outshine her. Hearing her own confession forced me to confront my feelings, too: anger, hurt, and surprisingly a cautious hope that maybe she could change. It's going to take time, I told her, not because I don't want to forgive, but because trust isn't rebuilt in a day. And recognition. That doesn't mean erasing the past, she nodded. Tears brimming. I understand. I'll try. I really will. Meanwhile, the ripple effects of my revelation spread beyond family. Friends who had quietly watched my struggles were suddenly more present. Invitations, professional opportunities, even casual conversations carried a new tone: respect, acknowledgement, and interest in my perspective. People began treating me as a force to be reckoned with rather than the invisible shadow of my sister or my family's expectations. But not everyone welcomed the shift. Some extended relatives expressed thinly veiled resentment. At one family gathering, my Aunt Marlene, who had always favored Sophie, whispered harshly to my mother, "I don't know why you're letting her get so big-headed. She was always quiet. Now she acts like she owns the place." I overheard her and smiled inwardly. Their discomfort was a side effect of my visibility, a small price for freedom. I chose not to engage, understanding that their resistance was never about me, but about their own insecurities and attachments to old hierarchies. At work, my rise continued, but it wasn't without challenges. Some colleagues who had long dismissed me as quiet or unassuming suddenly tried to compete, undermine, or claim credit for ideas I had developed. I learned quickly how to navigate this: firm boundaries, clear documentation, and calm assertion. I didn't need to shout. My work spoke loudly enough. And yet, I found myself reflecting on the deeper lessons of my journey. Being invisible had been painful, but it had also forged resilience, discipline, and a quiet strength. My victories weren't just financial, they were emotional and personal. I could now navigate life with confidence, knowing my worth didn't depend on validation from others, but on the recognition I gave myself. One quiet evening, I sat on the balcony of my penthouse apartment, the city lights shimmering like scattered stars. Sophie called, her voice hesitant but warm. "I just wanted to say thank you," she said, "not for letting me back into your life, but for being so uncompromisingly you. You've made me realize a lot about myself." I smelled, the corners of my lips curving naturally. "Thank you for saying that. It matters more than you think. Just remember, growth takes courage, and courage isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet, persistent, and consistent." That's how I survived. She laughed softly, a sound that held relief and a touch of awe. "I hope I can be even half as strong someday." "You already can," I said genuinely. "It just takes honesty and the willingness to see the truth, even if it hurts." After the call, I reflected on how far I had come, from invisible child to a woman who commanded her own life. I had learned that recognition from others is fleeting, but recognition of oneself is eternal. The battle wasn't against Sophie or my parents or anyone else. It was against the years of doubt, neglect, and invisibility that had tried to define me, and I had won. The following months brought more stability. My parents continued to adjust their behavior. Sophie made sincere efforts to repair our relationship, and I embraced new opportunities without fear of being overshadowed. For the first time in my life, I felt truly seen by myself and by the world. Yet, even in triumph, I knew life would continue to challenge me. Relationships would shift, ambitions would collide, and not every gesture of recognition would be sincere. But the invisible weight that had haunted me for 30 years was gone, and in its place stood a clarity I had never known. I was no longer invisible. I was Olivia Harper, fully present, fully recognized, and unapologetically alive. The calm I had cultivated over the past months was about to be tested in ways I hadn't anticipated. Just when I thought the family's dynamics had begun to settle into a more balanced rhythm, an unexpected letter arrived, delivered with that faint sense of ceremony the only old money families can muster. It was from my father, Michael. The envelope was thick, the handwriting formal, almost imperious. I hesitated before opening it, a part of me bracing for a subtle rebuke or some conditional acknowledgement of my success. Inside was a single page. Olivia, it's time we address the estate and the family trust. You've shown remarkable capability and independence. It is my wish that you take a seat at the table where decisions are made, not just as a beneficiary, but as a partner in shaping our family's legacy. Dad, the words should have felt triumphant, but I froze. It was not the acknowledgement that frightened me. It was the responsibility. To sit at that table meant confronting decades of favoritism, resentment, and unspoken power struggles. It was an invitation to visibility. But now, on the largest stage of all, the family's wealth and influence, I took a deep breath and called Sophie. Guess what? I said, trying to keep my voice light. She paused, a mix of curiosity and weariness in her tone. What? I'm invited to join Dad at the trust meetings. I said, I'm in charge in a sense. We're talking big decisions, legacy level stuff. There was a silence on the line, then almost inaudible. Wow, I didn't think this day would come for you. I mean, I didn't either, I admitted. But it's here and it's complicated. I don't know if I'm ready for the scrutiny. The politics, it's a different kind of visibility. Sophie, you're ready. She said firmly, you've handled the worst of them already. You can handle this, too. Just don't let the past dictate how you move forward. You set the rules now. Her words were simple, but they hit home. She was right. All the years I had spent fighting to be seen, to be acknowledged, had prepared me for this moment. It was not a gift. They were handing me a challenge, one I had earned. The first meeting was tense. Extended family members, some polite, some coldly indifferent, surrounded the massive oak table in the Harper Estates boardroom. I could feel their eyes calculating, weighing, waiting for me to falter. I reminded myself I wasn't that invisible child anymore. Every argument I made, every question I posed was backed by years of preparation, years of unseen observation, and the quiet accumulation of skill. Sophie sat beside me, her presence a quiet reassurance. Dad introduced me, his pride subtle but undeniable, and the meeting began. Almost immediately, the challenges surfaced. Certain relatives questioned my experience, hinted at favoritism, and tried to undermine my suggestions. I listened, composed, and then responded with clarity. Facts, figures, strategic plans. I didn't need to shout. My preparations spoke louder than any accusation. By the end of the session, some eyebrows were raised, some grudging nods given. I knew not everyone approved, but I had made my mark. I had transformed my visibility from a personal victory into a position of power and influence. When the meeting concluded, Dad pulled me aside. You've exceeded my expectations, he said quietly. I hope you understand how proud I am, not because of the money, but because you're finally claiming your place. I nodded, a lump in my throat. It was more than pride. It was validation that my struggle had led somewhere meaningful. That night, I reflected on the journey, every slight, every ignored birthday, every whispered favoritism. It had all shaped me. And now, those very experiences were fueling my ability to stand at a table where legacies were decided, where voices were heard, where power could be wielded wisely. Sophie called again, this time with a mischievous tone. So, the invisible child just became the most powerful one in the room. I laughed, a full unrestrained sound. Feels that way. But it's only the beginning. The real work starts now, and I'll do it on my terms, not anyone else's. The days that followed were a whirlwind. Trust meetings became regular, responsibilities increased, and scrutiny intensified. But each challenge was a reminder of my resilience. I had survived 30 years of invisibility. Now I was navigating the complex world of family power, fully seen, fully capable, and unapologetically alive. The transformation was no longer internal alone. It was external. The family that once ignored me now had to reckon with my presence, my opinions, my vision, and I reveled in it, not with vengeance, but with a quiet, confident authority that demanded respect simply because it was earned. I was no longer invisible. I was Olivia Harper, recognized, influential, and unshakable, and the world, as I now understood, would have no choice but to notice. The newfound authority brought a sense of accomplishment, but also an unexpected tension. Some family members quietly plotted, forming alliances and whispering doubts. The trust meetings became battlegrounds disguised as boardroom diplomacy. I quickly learned that influence wasn't just about ideas. It was about perception, timing, and subtle power plays. One evening, as I returned home from a particularly grueling session, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "We need to talk. Some things you don't yet see. Meet me at the old gallery tomorrow, 7 p.m. My first instinct was to ignore it. Anonymous messages were often traps. But curiosity and a hint of adrenaline won over caution. The next evening, I drove to the abandoned gallery downtown, its once grand windows dusty and cracked. Inside, a lone figure emerged from the shadows. "Olivia." The voice was soft but sharp. "I'm glad you came." It was Henry, my cousin's right-hand man in many of the family dealings. He was known for his intelligence and ruthlessness. And now, he was smiling just enough to unsettle me. "I assume this isn't a social visit," I said, keeping my voice steady. "No," he said, stepping closer. "It's a warning. You've upset the balance." Some of the senior family members, those who have controlled the trust for decades, are unhappy. They see you as a threat. You need to understand. Every move you make is watched, and sometimes watched with intent to sabotage. I measured my response. "Are you threatening me?" "No," he said quickly. "I'm offering you a chance. Information, strategy, insight. You're not invisible anymore." "Yes." "But they want to remind you that visibility comes with risk. You either learn fast, or you'll be eaten alive." The weight of his words sank in. Power had a cost, and I was still learning its true price. Over the next few weeks, subtle challenges surfaced. Proposals I had prepared meticulously were questioned aggressively. Initiatives I supported were delayed without explanation, and rumors circulated quietly among relatives, undermining my credibility. It was a delicate game of survival, and I had no choice but to play. Sophie noticed the shift. "You're not just competing with them," she said one night over dinner. "You're navigating a maze built to test your endurance, your patience, your ethics. Don't let them define the rules for you. Make your own." Her words resonated. I realized that visibility was not enough. True influence required foresight, alliances, and strategic maneuvering. I began reaching out discreetly to family members who had been sidelined, offering collaboration rather than confrontation. Slowly, alliances formed, not out of loyalty, but mutual interest. And then came the first major test. A proposal to invest in a high-stakes development was presented at a meeting. The old guard opposed it, setting risk and precedent. I had studied the numbers, the market trends, and the potential returns meticulously. I spoke, presenting data with clarity, anticipating objections, and countering them with precision. The room was tense. Some eyes glared, others scrutinized. Minutes felt like hours. When the vote was called, the proposal passed, but by the narrowest margin. I had won, but it was a fragile victory. Later, Henry appeared again. "You did well," he said, "but remember, this is just the beginning. There's more than money at stake. Now, family legacy, influence, pride. You'll see how far people are willing to go to protect what they think is theirs." I understood the invisible child was gone. In her place stood someone powerful, yes, but also vulnerable, constantly tested, always aware of the undercurrents beneath every smile, every handshake. And yet, for the first time, I felt a sense of exhilaration. For years, my world had been limited, invisible, constrained by other people's favoritism. Now, I navigated a world of strategy, influence, and power on my own terms. As I looked at the family portraits lining the gallery hallway, I felt the quiet triumph. The years of being unseen had forged resilience, intelligence, and courage. They had prepared me for this battlefield, for this game, for this life fully alive in the light. The real challenge, I realized, was not about asserting power. It was about maintaining integrity while navigating ambition, loyalty, and legacy. And I was ready. The weeks that followed were a careful dance of strategy and subtle negotiation. Every meeting, every family gathering, every casual conversation was a potential battlefield. I had learned to smile when I wanted to scowl too, nod when I wanted to challenge, and to listen twice as much as I spoke. Then, one evening, an urgent call changed everything. "It's urgent." Sophie's voice trembled. "You need to come home now." When I arrived, the tension in the house was palpable. My father sat slumped in the living room, silent. My mother was whispering to herself, tears rolling down her cheeks. Something was deeply wrong. "What happened?" I asked, alarmed. My father looked up, his eyes heavy with dread. "It's the trust. They found a way to override some of your recent decisions. There's a clause we never noticed. They're taking control back starting tomorrow." I felt my stomach drop. After weeks of careful maneuvering, all the progress I had made was suddenly threatened. I had underestimated them. Sophie placed a hand on my shoulder. "We knew this might happen. That's why I've been gathering documents, emails, anything we can use to protect your position. You're not powerless." Determined, I spent the night poring over the trust documents, uncovering every possible loophole, every clause that could be leveraged. Hours turned into dawn. My hands HAD, my eyes burned. But I refused to back down. The next day, the family convened at the usual meeting room. I arrived armed with evidence, alternative proposals, and a plan to secure my influence. The old guard was already seated, their smiles sharp and confident. One by one, they presented their arguments, attempting to dismantle my recent initiatives. When it was my turn, I stood, with steady, heart racing. I laid out the evidence, pointed to the overlooked clauses, and presented a compromise that benefited everyone while preserving my authority. For a tense moment, the room fell silent. Then, murmurs began to ripple through the assembly, faces shifted, alliances wavered, and I could sense uncertainty creeping into their confident facades. It was Henry who broke the silence. "This is clever," he said, a small, approving smile on his lips. "Strategic, fair, and smart. I'd vote for it if I could." By the end of the meeting, the vote swung in my favor. My position was secure for now, but the victory felt fragile, like standing on shifting sand. I had survived the storm, but I knew more turbulence was inevitable. Later that night, I reflected on how far I had come. From the invisible child ignored and underestimated to someone commanding influence and shaping outcomes, I had transformed completely. But power came with its own weight, a responsibility I could never ignore. The next morning, as I walked through the family estate, I noticed subtle signs of dissent. A note left in my office, a brief whispered conversation as I passed, a glance too sharp to be innocent. The game was far from over. And then the final twist arrived. Sophie came rushing to me, her face pale. "You need to see this," she said, handing me a tablet. On the screen was a video, grainy but unmistakable. One of the senior family members, The very person who had opposed me the most was seen conspiring with an outsider, someone who had no right to influence the trust. Their plan was clear: discredit me, manipulate the remaining family members, and seize control. I felt a surge of anger, but also clarity. The invisible child may have been powerless before, but now I had the knowledge, the resources, and the resilience to confront them. And confront them, I would. This was no longer just about influence or recognition. It was about survival, legacy, and justice. I turned to Sophie. It's time we stop playing defense, I said. We're going on the offense. She nodded, a determined fire in her eyes mirroring my own. Together, we began to strategize, not just to protect my position, but to ensure that no one could ever underestimate me again. The stakes had never been higher, the game had become ruthless, and the players even more cunning.